Arnold, and I head up the Additional Needs Ministry at Urban Saints. And over this next few minutes, just going to share a few thoughts, ideas, inspirations, challenges for us as we think about things that we can pray about, particularly relating to children and young people with additional needs and disabilities, and the folk that look after them, whether that's family members, carers, people in children's and youth work across the country, and particularly in groups that are connected to Urban Saints. Challenging times, isn't it? Really difficult times for many people, and that's particularly true for children and young people with additional needs and disabilities. Many of them crave routine, order, continuity, things to be the same. And we are living in very different times, and nothing is the same and nothing is certain. And that can be really unsettling for a lot of children and young people with additional needs. And so at this time, maybe the first thing we can do is to pray for God's peace to flow in the homes and in the places where children and young people with additional needs and disabilities live, whether that's with their families, whether that's in the care system. Then let's lift them before God and pray that in these difficult times, these times of uncertainty, that they will still receive God's peace and know God working in their lives. It can be a time when families can really be struggling because, again, getting out to get essential supplies in. I know lots of families who are struggling to get the food they need. And, we all know about the shortages that are happening in the shops. We've seen the bare shelves, and maybe we've seen people fighting over toilet roll and all that kind of thing. For a lot of children, they may have a very limited diet, a very restricted range of things that they are either able to eat or are willing to eat. And that can even come down to particular brands of food or types of food. And if those aren't available, that can cause real challenges and difficulties. I know lots of families who have been struggling to get hold of the medication they need to support their child or young person as well, or have been queuing for hours at chemists to try and get prescriptions fulfilled. So pray for those families that are struggling with shortages or unavailability of food, or particularly of medication. That they will be able to get hold of what they need, that there will be support networks around them that can help them to be able to access what they need. I know lots of churches are stepping up in amazing ways to gather around vulnerable families, vulnerable folk, and support them. And let's, as we think about particularly children, young people with additional needs and disabilities and their families, let's think about how we can support them. And get alongside them. Let's pray that those folk will gather around those families and bless them and help them in the ways that they need it the most. It's interesting at the moment, the internet's full of online church, of folk posting lots of online content, and that's amazing. And it's really, really good to see that stuff going out there. A lot of families have been experiencing social isolation for most of the time that they've been journeying with their child or young person. Being a family member of a child with additional needs or disability brings often social isolation with it. Accessing things in the same way as everybody else can often be really hard, and that includes church. There are lots and lots of families with children with additional needs who struggle to get to church, to access church, or find that church just doesn't work for them in the way that it's set up. And so being able to connect into online church and be able to just be a part of services that are happening in lots of different places can really, really be helpful. And it's great that those services are happening, that people are able to connect in and join in with them. And so our prayer would be that once all this has run its course, once coronavirus is consigned, hopefully, perhaps to the history books, that actually all of these things that are in place, online services and lots of resources being offered out there in the web, will be continuing to be available for folk, including families with children with additional needs and disabilities, that are really valuing that stuff and have been craving for it and looking for it for a long time. So let's keep that good work going. Let's make sure that those families are able to engage with church in really positive and creative ways. As far as the additional needs ministry is concerned, there's a change of focus, really, less in the way of getting out and running training and turning up at conferences. A lot of that stuff that was planned for the next few months has been postponed and hopefully will be picked up again later in the year. But looking at a lot of, again, web-based online resources, writing an online training program called Can I? Church's Additional Needs Inclusion, putting together some modules that explore what it means to belong to church, what it means to grow within church, what it means to thrive and be an active participant and leader in church for children, young people and their families where there are additional needs and disabilities. And so there's an opportunity now for us to really dig into creating that content and making that available. So do pray for inspiration, for God to speak into our hearts and minds as we put that content together, so that we're putting in there what he wants us to put in there. Lots of writing this week has been a blur of different organizations getting in touch and saying, hey, could you help us with some content? Could you write something about coronavirus that can be accessible for children and young people with additional needs to help them understand what's going on? And so it's been great to be able to speak into that and just pray that, again, the children and young people with additional needs and the families they're a part of will continue to be remembered as organizations push content out to support everybody during this crisis, that we'll continue to think about those that are the most vulnerable in our communities. And it's great to think that organisations are continuing to adapt to the situation that we're in. Many of us were really sort of heartbroken when Spring Harvest had to make the inevitable and right decision that Spring Harvest couldn't continue this year. But it's great that there's going to be some online content, and I'm delighted to have been asked to help with that. So again, just prayer for just some inspiration as we start to put some content together that's accessible and inclusive, that helps everybody to engage with what life was like in the early church. And there are some parallels between life in the early church and what church is looking like for us a bit now. Families meeting together in their homes and connecting in different ways. And we're looking at maybe what some of those parallels can tell us about the ways in which church could continue now. Because I guess what we are all getting used to is that the old normal ain't coming back. Wherever we get to with this, whatever happens once this next few weeks or months have finally run their course, it's not going to be like it was in the past. It's going to be a new normal. And we all need to think about what that new normal looks like and what that might mean for each one of us and for all of the children and young people and families and children's and youth workers and everybody that we connect with and are involved in supporting. So yeah, prayer for God's wisdom in all of that, prayer that God would speak into our hearts about what the future might be like for us, to help us to prepare and be ready for what he's got in mind for us next. So a few things there for you to think about and pray about, and thank you so much for your prayers. They are hugely important and vital, particularly at a time like this, when we're all trying to get our heads around things, and just to know that you're lifting us all up in your prayers and that you are just sharing with God how you're feeling, and letting him minister to you in that as well is really important. So let's keep digging into prayer. Let's keep seeking God in all of this, and let's keep remembering the great things that are coming out of this time that hopefully will shape the future in a better way for all of us. And particularly from my perspective for children and young people with additional needs. Thank you for your prayers. Thank you for joining in with this session, and every blessing, health and safety to you in this time. Thanks and goodbye.